bear with me for this one because it's actually, energetically speaking, a very new paradigm that it almost feels like the levee broke into an old paradigm. So I'm trying to find the right way to convey what wants to come out vibrationally and also through language. So what I want to about today is the way that I see the birth of the empath and what that actually means for where we are in humanity today. So, and a lesson actually about true love at the end of this. So let me just bear with me through this. The way that I see the birth of the empath is that the empath can come into this physical incarnation having chosen by the soul to live in a hardwired machine that is wired for being an empath. And I'm not just talking about having empathy for normal people. I'm talking about the person who can literally read everybody's feelings and thoughts around them. And the only problem with that hardwiring when we're here is that one, we're always on overdrive. Two, we're likely living in our shadow because we're untrained about how to use it. So we are not picking up. If we were only empathing with super happy, awesome people, we wouldn't call ourselves empaths. We would call ourselves happy, right? So it's in that way a disability to come into the planet and choose, having chosen as a soul that particular hardwiring so that it can learn something. But that hardwiring on a physical manifest form was created because you came into a lineage which may or may not have anything to do with you, right, as a soul, but you were hardwired into a physical body from a lineage that at some point someone in consciousness was in such a dire situation that they had to learn the mechanism of being an empath. And this is only if you get it hereditarily, because you can also come in and choose parents that are going to create you to be in such a toxic situation, like the one that would be required for an ancestor if you inherited it, that you have to learn the defense mechanism of being an empath, which is I feel you, I know what you're thinking, I know, like, all of that. And it's always on guard, right? Like, being an empath feels very much toxic sometimes because we're vibrating with an old story, which is what I want to talk about today. The birth of the empath, you know, at one point, someone in your lineage carried the similar story that you're carrying, which is what we see when we are, especially codependent empaths. The only stories that are written on this plane of reality are the victim, the perpetrator, the savior. And we abide by that in consciousness. Our wiring is hardwired for that story to take place. So how do we get out of that story is one question, because it's the only thing we see. So the level above that story is actually an unwritten story. But I had an experience yesterday, and I feel so grateful that I can actually share this with you guys, because whether it's true or not, whether it's a metaphor, whether it's true, whether I was picking up on somebody else's timeline and consciousness, what my experience was I was getting a massage from this woman who the second she put her hands on me, I had this visual of me being a man in an authority position, maybe like an orphanage type situation, over this woman who was at the time in my vision a 6-year-old boy, and I was abusing him, like physically abusing him. And so my first thought was, I can't receive this, right? Like, I can't receive her massage. I can't receive her, essentially her forgiveness. Like, somebody that I had perpetrated in a past life is now giving to me, and that feels really wrong for me, right? So I was stuck in this story, and I needed retribution. I wanted her forgiveness. I wanted to give her something. I wanted to make up for that. You know, it was the light side of the story, don't get me wrong. But me even perpetuating that story in consciousness, that I needed to give her something because I was aware that I had perpetrated against her. And this is what we do internally, even to ourselves, right? Like, the codependent empath is perpetrating themselves constantly. So victim, we run the story in our own head. We're all of those things to ourselves. But a victim of a genuine scenario could walk out of that scenario and go, I just saved myself. I was the savior to that story. I'm not the victim. But what the codependent empath does is runs on a wiring of, I am a victim. I see perpetrators. Maybe I'm a perpetrator. I don't know how to save anybody. I don't know how to save myself. So the story, the vibration of the story is always that frequency. It's, I owe you something. I need your forgiveness. I want to give you something. I feel terrible. And then I want to beat myself up for what I've done or for what I've perceived that I've done. And let's get clear here. There is earned guilt and there is unearned guilt. And we, as a frequency, are operating on unearned guilt, that we did not do anything wrong and we were made to believe that we were wrong. So let me get back. I digress. I'm sorry. So keeping in my desire for retribution, and I noticed this as she's working on me, and I say, okay, how can I open to this awareness? And what comes to me is that if I receive from this woman, present day, right now, this timeline, without the story that I have to seek retribution in the old story, I met her in a new story, so to speak. So if I can look at her and go, I receive because I believe in the benevolence that you offer, and I'm willing to basically swallow that on behalf of myself and the world and you, then I am loving. If I can receive you, what you give to me now, I am made anew. So the codependent empath has this tendency to go, I can't receive that because whatever our reasons are. And we have a resistance to receiving. We push things away, we bounce things back, and then we're pissed off that we don't ever let anything in. So when we receive, whether it's just life as it is, instead of trying to change it, that's a reception. You go, okay, God, I receive what you're giving me right now instead of rejecting what you're giving me. When you receive that, when you receive an offering, we are being in love because we are trusting the benevolence of what is giving to us. And when we see that internally, we see it externally. So the new mirror is a benevolent one. And that's where we can rewrite a story. That's where I'm not hooked in to the savior, victim, perpetrator type story. I am above the story. So that's what the empath came to do. So if we inherited or we adapted this trait of being an empath, we can see all sides of the story out there, right? But we don't necessarily pay attention long enough to see that we're actually in here doing that story, creating that story, recreating that story over and over and over again. And had I sought for retribution for something that a different timeline, a different character version of me or whatever, maybe it was her story, if I would have sought retribution for that, I would have kept us in the same story. And I think that this is the message overall of Jesus Christ and resurrection and being made anew, is that we are not just in present day, we are in present day possibility. And as codependent empaths, we get really stuck in the cages, mental cages that we see. And we don't even see the storylines that we're running. And when we can step above the storyline and above that vibration, we have the power actually to leverage something so new, because actually the codependent, well, not I shouldn't say the codependent, but a healed empath, when you understand the balance of what that actually means, when we choose to see heaven every day instead of run down the rabbit hole of our hell, when we are full of ourselves, we have the capacity to not just receive that which we've always longed to receive, but to literally be the person who offers other people the opportunity to receive themselves. And when that happens, it's a whole new world. It's an entirely new world. So I know that you know what I'm talking about if you are even watching it at this point. So in order to create that, we have to think of the reality that we're stepping into a sphere when we choose to jump out of the old story that is yet it's unwritten, right? This is a new reality that we're trying to create. So we might not know what that is going to look like, because if we think of it in terms of feelings, we think of it in terms also of the old story. Maybe it's like you're the hero, you're the savior, whatever. We might get it wrong if we try to see what it's going to look like to declare it, but we can feel it. We can feel into a new reality that is not from an old story where we are shaming ourselves, perpetrating ourselves for a time that we didn't know better. We have to have compassion with ourselves, whether that timeline was true or not, whether I've never done anything wrong or I've done a lot wrong in my life. We have to have enough compassion for ourselves to stop perpetrating the inner victim and then coming to save ourselves and then perpetrating ourselves, beating ourselves over the head, wanting to destroy ourselves just to save something. And that is what we do. And there's so many things out there that can be saved when we stop internally just running the same old stories, same old mechanisms, destroying ourselves and thinking that it's actually the world out there that's destroying us. It's not. When you are a codependent empath, what is happening to you is happening in you. And you have the capacity to clear all that out, take up all that space, and write a whole new reality. It's not dreams we are manifesting. It is a reality we are manifesting. And it is, ironically, it's not branches that need to be watered. It's roots that need to be watered. It's roots that need to be watered. And I think that we get it all wrong in our quest for enlightenment when we're going, I'm watering my branches, look at me. Instead of like, I'm getting into the dirt. I'm getting into being like snugly tight in my roots and feeling kind of suffocated by the earth. And that's also part of the experience. So when we can bring the vibrations of our dreams into our body, into our roots, that is us creating a whole new story. And we don't have to know what it's going to look like, because the old roots it's just naturally going to basically be like new fertile soil that we're in when we hold the frequency in our roots instead of holding it up here in our head. So let's get out of the old story, guys, because, it's so funny that I go, oh, we're not here to save the world or change the world, but we kind of are at the same time. But we have to change our inner world before we're allowed to change the world. At least that's the way the universe has kind of led me to believe. So I hope that you have an awesome day, guys. Thanks for being here with me. It means the world to me. It really does. Bye.